Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. Our Week 14 reaction is presented by Uber Eats. Get game day deals all season long on Uber Eats. Used them today. There you go, baby. I went, had friends over at the house. Got McDonald's, several chicken sandwiches, some French fries. Fantastic as always. So I used Uber Eats this weekend. It's like a Pavlovian response. And I went to McDonald's. Anyway, it was fantastic. 3 grilled chicken sandwiches, 2 fries. Uber Eats has game day deliveries dialed in. Couldn't be easier. Use it every weekend. Plus, they got deals going all season long. Uber Eats. It is my regular go-to. McDonald's was fantastic as well. One for me, maybe one for the crew. With Uber Eats, you can actually score buy one, get one free fries with McDonald's through December 15th. That's what I did. Ordering Uber Eats, perfect addition to your pregame ritual or your postgame ritual anytime. And as the official on-demand food delivery partner of the NFL, Uber Eats is keeping the deals going all season. Must-grab deals on nuggets, sandwiches, drinks, and more all season long. So order McDonald's on Uber Eats, now for game day. Terms apply. See app for details. All right, it's time for our Sunday collaboration. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout with the Philadelphia Eagles, has the 3 and Out podcast. Rams hold on to beat the Bills 44-42. Before I talk about the game, there was a really interesting play at the very end of the game. It did not cost the Bills the game, but I thought Tom Brady touched on it, and it drove me crazy. This is one of the things I don't love defensive coaches and sometimes a lack of sense of urgency with the offense. So there was about 1:15 left, and Brady kind of nailed it. Spread your team out, take 3 quick shots into the end zone, get a touchdown. You want to have about 1:20 left, drive down and score. And then Sean McDermott twice ran the ball into the end zone, which he had to burn one of his own timeouts, the second one they scored on. And it's just situational football. It didn't in the end matter, but that was like one of those, oh, this is really obvious. I think the Andy Reids, McVays, Shanahans would get that. That drove me nuts. Did it bother you?
No, to me, when you're in that situation, when you need the onside kick at the end of the game, I basically, in my mind, give you a loss. I just, it doesn't bother me. Like that game was lost early in the game when the Bills showed up really flat. They showed up
no
like
juice.
today was, they showed up today like it was a trap game, right?
Yeah.
Sunday night, they win the division, which it's about as early as you can win a division in the NFL, December 1st, right? You fly across the country to play the Rams, who aren't some scrub team, but you got the Lions next week and you come out flat, and it took a Herculean effort from Josh just to get back into the game. And for whatever reason, your defense, which has been really good, was bad today. I mean, they were getting slice and dice. And let's face it, McVay, Matt Stafford, these 2 guys, offensive wizard, great quarterback, both make a lot of money. They have not been that good for about a month. This was not the Rams team that we have been watching, right? They have not been played well on offense. Now their offensive line's coming back together, but today, I mean, they went toe-to-toe, I thought, with the best player in the league.
I thought it was the best the Rams have played since the Super Bowl season. I thought they played nearly a flawless football game. The fact that Buffalo scored so many points, Josh Allen, first player in the history of the sport as a quarterback to have 3 rushing and 3 passing touchdowns in the same game. If you did not see this game, it may be the single greatest. I don't think I've ever seen a moment of a player carrying a franchise. The secondary for the Bills was banged up and torched. They came in with no juice. He single-handedly kept them in the game with running play, and not just casual running plays, not 6-8 yards, like 25, 35, 40-yard running plays. I mean, Mahomes has all the trophies. Mahomes is not as talented as Josh Allen. Josh Allen's insane. And I thought this was Puka's had injury issues. So has Cooper Kupp, and they're going to draft a receiver. I'm pretty strongly a believer of that. But it shows you why the Rams are now 7-6. And with Arizona fumbling, San Francisco feels big win today for them, but feels like they're just a little disjointed. If the Rams sneak into the playoffs, John, watch out, because I would have no interest playing this team.
Well, to me, Thursday night, they play the Niners. So they could kind of end the Niners season. right? They could end the Niner season. They would be 8-6, and they would be in position. Seattle, if Mike Macdonald was an offensive coach, we'd be talking about him like a McVay or Shanahan, but he coaches defense. He's done a fantastic job. But this is must win for really the Niners, aren't really alive, and they lost another player today at the end of the game. Their running back got hurt, so now they're on their 7th running back. But the Rams, this goes back to last year. When Puka plays like this, he had 12 for 160. He becomes, essentially he becomes like a Marvin Harrison or a Chris Carter or Justin. He becomes an unstoppable force. They are tough to beat because I was texting with some buddies this week. Jared Verse and Fisk are so good.
Yeah.
Those 2 draft picks are immediately people around the league. They're violent because he's like, I was texting with a buddy. He was like, their talent on defense isn't that great, but their defensive line is violent.
Excellent.
And it starts with those 2 guys.
Yeah.
And a lot of people thought, like, is Fisk a little bit of an overdraft? Verse, will his power translate? It's translated. And those 2 guys are ass kickers. To me, it's all about Puka, who they had to wrap at the end of the game. Now he came back in. Something to monitor now, short week. But the other thing, and you hit on it, we have a lot of these arguments, I think, on social media and just when we talk about Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. I understand Lamar has a couple MVPs. Now, last year's MVP was not a great MVP season. Like, if you look at his numbers, he had a much better season in 19. Statistically, up until a couple weeks ago, he was blowing that season away this year. Josh Allen is one of the best players in any sport I've ever watched.
Yes.
Like, how are we arguing when we watch this guy play?
No.
Like, does he throw a couple picks? Yeah, so did Favre. Like, what are we talking about?
He is, to me, Ohtani. He is different than the other great players. Like Ohtani, Mookie Betts is amazing, but he looks small compared to Ohtani because he is. Yeah. I mean, it has an Ohtani feel like, wow, you may be watching the greatest talent ever. I mean, John Elway ran. He didn't do this. No. John Elway was strong. He wasn't this. John Elway had a good arm. I'm not sure it was this. Like, and again, we all acknowledge Mahomes, but Mahomes has Reed, great ownership. I mean, everything is Patrick's terrific. But what I watched today, I mean, just here's the thing I worry about with Buffalo. Kansas City never delivers that. Kansas City, when they show up with no juice. Now, this did happen early in Mahomes' career. They'd fall behind 24-10, and you'd be like, oh, my God. But in the last 3 years, Kansas City does not do this. You can beat them. You can beat them at Arrowhead, but they rarely come with no juice. And that's a team with 2 trophies. Buffalo doesn't have one, and it worries me at times. Like the first half was 24-14. The Rams did whatever they wanted to. Kyron Williams ran, Hooker, Kupp. I mean, they just did whatever they wanted to. I mean, it was like 8-man football for Buffalo. It's like, is anybody guarding the receivers? That does trouble me. They were on about a 4 or 5 week run where I had not seen this, but don't they give you this about 4 times a year?
Yeah, and they've been doing it now for a couple of years, but then they bounce back. Next week they're playing Detroit, who still, I would imagine, even with the mini bye, still going to have a bunch of injuries. Like, that's a pretty big moment for Buffalo because, Colin, they finish with Patriots, Jets, Patriots. Yeah. So they should be able to sleepwalk to go 3-0 down the stretch. But we'll have to see. Kansas City still got a couple tough games. Every game they play is close. I don't think this totally kills Buffalo from the number 1 seed because if you look at Pittsburgh's last 4 games, it's like Philly, Baltimore.
Brutal.
They got a tough schedule. So to me, Buffalo, their schedule eases up. And I think we're going to learn a lot about them with Detroit because we already know about Detroit, right? Their competitive character, their makeup. You can never write them off. They could be throwing me and you out there on defense. But today the first half was embarrassing for Buffalo. That can't happen if you want to win a Super Bowl. And then they're not, even when healthy, are talented enough to just cruise by, right? Their defense is not loaded with names on the back end.
Once you pay your star quarterback, Kansas City has offensive tackle issues. They're still trying to figure out, frankly, their receiving core. They're not as good at corner as they were last year. Like it's there. Once you pay the quarterback, right now, Baltimore's back end. Joe Burrow's defense is atrocious. If you look at Stafford, let's be honest about it. The offensive line, it feels like they're playing catch up with the Rams the last several years. They don't pay a single person right now on the defensive side. They can't afford to. So I think it really, that's why coaching and quarterback play, John, is so essential in January, December, and early February, There are no perfect teams. They're just, you can't, in the transfer portal, by the way, has done this to college football in the NIL. The minute you think you're loaded, you lose all, like an Ohio State can't carry 3 great tackles because somebody poaches the best tackle they have that's not starting. So like in college football, the unintended benefit of the transfer portal and NIL is there's no more Alabamas. That's over. Like there's just too many teams here. And when I watch the NFL, you're like, quarterback play and coaching obviously matters, but coaching becomes essential because, I mean, you watch Buffalo in the back end today, Baltimore's back end. Jesus, those are bad secondaries.
The one thing with Buffalo and same thing with Baltimore, when their offense is on, I mean, they flipped a switch in the second half. They can get to 40. How many teams? I mean, Stafford is one of the better quarterbacks of his generation. Puka looks like clearly when he's healthy, one of the best wide receivers. How many teams are beating Buffalo when they flip that switch in the second half? There's a short list. And you're going to have a Stafford or a Lamar or a guy like that to beat them when they are playing like that on offense. When
Stafford's last month, 120 passer rating, 11 touchdowns, no picks. Stafford's on a complete heater. And I think, honestly,
they're getting
he
healthy.
Was a little – the O-line's getting healthy. Okay, I want to pivot to a game. Now, it's not the second best game, but I think it speaks to – the Bears are a fascinating topic. So they lost 38-13, and it was the worst first half any team has played in the NFL this year. It bordered on like Carolina and their offense last year. So at half, they had 12 yards and a first down. But what was interesting to me is generally you get an interim head coach bump. They didn't even get that. It was their worst performance with an interim coach. Total disarray as a franchise. 4 yards in the first half. Fewest by a Bears team since 1991. So they're just running through coaches and they're getting no bounce. So my question to you as we start with the Bears and then pivot to the Niners, who have to win Thursday or the season's over, is to me, you need a culture changer. Not just a football coach. That's why Ben Johnson's not the answer. You have to come in. Somebody's going to come in and kick ass. I think you have to swing big. You have to go big. Harbaugh should have been it last year. Who are we putting front and center in the coaching search? Because you and I would both acknowledge we don't love the owner. Kevin Warren's not a strong president if you ask people around the league. The front office, Ryan Poles, I think there are moments I like him. Coaching staff's in disarray. Players today indicated they don't trust this staff. Where do you go for a coach?
Well, normally with interim coaches, really quick, Colin, you get a bump because you mess with the staff. They had already done that when they fired Waldron and made the interim head coach the offensive coordinator. So he actually got, in a weird way, diminished because he had to have more stuff on his plate. And clearly the offense was a joke in the first half. To me, Vrabel makes a lot of sense here.
Yes.
They need one thing when you watch Dan Campbell, when you took over the Lions, it was a job where you go, you can't do this, man. It ain't going to work. This is not going to happen here. And he basically said, screw you. It sure as hell is. And he had that type personality. Now,
they have poor ownership too. Like the Bears, they have below average ownership.
I would say the Bears have a more glamorous franchise and city than the Lions. They're really not that. They're much closer together than they are close to the Vikings and the Packers. Right?
That's right.
So you need to get a guy who comes in. But this is the problem, Colin. It gets back to Kevin Warren. That press conference he gave after they fired Eberflus, Ryan Poles, the GM, was riding shotgun. Well, why does every president, like I'm sure Kevin Warren's making 7 figures. He was hired to build the stadium, which is an extremely important job. But no one really cares about that. Like you don't give press conferences for selling PSLs or getting the naming rights deal for $400 million, even though it's a really big deal to the business. In the business world, and no one talks about that. Where do you get credit? When you're around the football team. And I think football people get very, very uncomfortable when a guy like him is around when coaches are getting fired, or if you were winning, he'd be right there. But when you lose, like today in the first half, all I could think about is like Kevin Warren's probably slithering out in his seat, right? I don't want to sit next to Poles or, this new interim coach. Like this is not my problem, but if things go well, they want them. Look at the 49ers are a good example. It's John and Kyle. And anything that happens is strictly on them. And they got an issue, they go right to Jed. And it's a streamlined process. And that's the way with every good organization. If Les and and Sean McVay needs something, they can go to the Kroenke. Now, they work with the president and you have good relationships, but it feels like to have a coach fired and have him lead the press conference is one of the more glaring things I've seen in recent memory. Shouldn't Ryan Poles be giving this press conference?
Yes.
And I heard from a bunch of people in the league, all these candidates see that. And that's where you get a guy like Vrabel that goes, maybe I'll figure out and I can fake it for a year. And then once I start winning, I will take over. But that's a turnoff to a lot of people. And the other thing is, and listen, and I'm guilty of this. I gave Caleb credit the last, I would say, 3 or 4 weeks. He has made some high-end plays, and the physical skills are undeniable.
Yeah.
But is he a good player, right? Because look, even last week against Detroit or on Thanksgiving, they were getting their ass kicked in the first half, down 16-0.
Yeah.
They have a lot. They scored 17 points in the fourth quarter against Minnesota. They have a lot of points when the game's kind of out of hand, and they've come storm. That's why when the Niners were up like 30-6, I'm like, get ready. The Bears are going to score a couple touchdowns right now. It's when they do their work. So listen, he's very talented, but that franchise has a lot of issues. And he's part of that. It's a team effort. And that's where Vrabel, I'm not as dependent on my quarterback. I'm going to build the team. I'm going to build the culture, the vision. Ben Johnson, a lot of guys, for every McVay and Kyle and LaFleur, we have seen countless offensive coordinators flop. I would not be in the business of first-time head coaches. I think that's too risky given their situation.
Well, look at the coaches who have succeeded taking over shipwrecks. Harbaugh with the Chargers, a talented mess. With Brandon Staley, it was a talented mess.
He did it with the Niners too, same situation.
Okay.
Back in the day.
Okay. Culture builder. Dan Campbell, he's not a schematic genius. He's a culture builder. So when you look at bad franchise, D'Amico Ryans is another guy. Good looking, kind of stoic, intense. McVay, Rams were an absolute mess.
Joke.
McVay, good with schemes, but if you ask him, it's his presence, his ability to own the locker room. When you have a bad franchise or a franchise that's turbulent or in disarray, McVay to the Rams, Dan Campbell, Jim Harbaugh twice, it's not the schematic geniuses. You got to change the culture. So Vrabel has the physical element, which Dan Campbell and Harbaugh have. They're kind of physically intimidating. Mike Tomlin, I would say, is a culture coach, right? Jimmy Johnson had that. Jimmy was a personnel and culture changer. Some guy, Shanahan's about schematics. I think Matt LaFleur can do both, but I think Matt's schematics are really good. I mean, he really breaks down Jordan and then builds him back up. Yeah. But I think Chicago's only choice. Ben Johnson, I don't think he has the personality, the gravitas to do it. I don't think a Cliff Kingsbury, those type of guys, they're not built for Chicago. It's like if you just think about a family. Let's say a family's in disarray, and you're kind of like, what father figure, what parent could save a family that was in disarray? It wouldn't have to be the smartest or the most experienced. It would be an ass kicker. Somebody that came in, put their arms around the kids, and we are changing the environment. That's all football teams are. It's just young guys, it's family, it's young coaches. So I think we both agree. I think Vrabel and by the way, unlike Belichick, doesn't have to dominate personnel. He's not going to be bitter if he doesn't dominate personnel.
One thing about Dan Campbell and Jim Harbaugh used as examples, they're former players. So they have a little bit of, I think cockiness is probably the wrong way to describe it, but a willingness to be pretty, I would say, self-confident in their own beliefs because they've done it as a player. And I think their physical presence, and McVay, let's face it, kind of feels like he played in the NFL for 5 years as a slot receiver, right? Yeah, it's the same with Tomlin. Like, yeah, but he played in the NFL if you didn't know any better. And that's where, the Ben Johnsons, the LaFleurs, the Kyles, they are scheme driven.
Yes.
It took Kyle a couple years to build up. This is a different element, right? When you're building, look at Lincoln. If you handed Lincoln Riley a team with a bunch of good players, I bet the team would be good. Yeah. But if you got to start from scratch, it gets a little more difficult. Where Nick Saban, bring it on. He lives for that moment. Yeah. And that's where I think the Bears have to be very, very careful. And anytime you have Kevin Warren's, just look at his resume. It's all business stuff. He's going to have such a heavy hand in this. It's that report last week that Jim Harbaugh would have been interested in the job. Of course he would have been. But
Yeah.
if Kevin Warren would not want no part of him, why? Because he would suck all the energy out of the room and get all the credit. Even though that's what always has driven me crazy about football institutions. In any other business, all you care about is like, hey, bring this guy on. We will make more money. We will have more success. It'll be good for everybody. Where in football, it's like, yeah, he probably is the best option, but it'll diminish my role. Even though I'll make the same amount of money, I won't get the credit. So we're not going to go down that road. Look at Atlanta. They're falling apart. And listen,
Yeah.
Raheem was a legit candidate, but they wanted no part of Belichick. Why? Because those people in the building knew that they were going to get neutered. And you're watching them now, you're like, they are in a free fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Thursday Night Football is on. It's only on Prime Video. Best season yet, packed with big rivalries and even bigger stars. Al Michaels, Kirk Herbstreit, Kaylee Hartung every week. Games you can't miss. Coverage begins at 7 Eastern with football's best party. TNF tonight, Thursday Night Football tonight. If you're not a Prime member, no problem. Sign up. 30-day free trial. Cancel anytime. Thursday Night Football, and it's on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details. It's time to look at this weekend's tastiest matchup. Sunday Night Football, brought to you by Uber Eats. Okay, so we have to, let's pivot. Vikings 42, Atlanta 21. Good first half, and then Minnesota took over. I pushed back when you suggested that Minnesota may have to re-sign Sam Darnold. First of all, he's going to have a very tasty free agent market. Vegas, Giants, Tennessee, minimum, are going to at least look at it if they don't like Cam Ward. Shedeur Sanders will go number one to either Vegas or the Giants. I think he will. Not everybody's going to like Cam Ward. But if you look, in the last month, Darnold has 11 TDs, no picks. This receiving core, plus TJ Hawkinson, Jefferson and Addison had 5 touchdowns today. We got to be honest about this. In the history of the league, you could put him in a very Rich Gannon class. Like, nobody believes in him to he's a top 4 quarterback in the league playing right now. I'm watching Darnold make plays today. And our thing was, I think we both felt the same. Big, strong, athletic, coachable, tough kid. But his accuracy could be hit and miss. Well, Kevin O'Connell's taken the reckless out and elevated. He's made it very intentional. Sam goes back to pass. You get a very intentional play. And if he has to ad-lib, which he did today, he's fantastic. He's not Lamar or Josh, but he is way high end in this league. He is in the Justin Herbert class. Like, I'm going to move and I'm going to crank it. And I never thought this. He's had one stinker all year. He had a couple picks against the Jags. They won that game. Remember that game down in Jacksonville? They were terrible in the red zone. So his stinker, they won. They could still be a number 1 seed. I think I'm sitting here thinking today, do you let him walk out of the building?
I think at minimum right now, he's in the category. If you don't want to do the long term, you got to franchise him. Right now, the problem with franchising, it's $41 million for a quarterback. And unlike these contracts, you don't get to push any of that off on, years in the future. He has 28 touchdowns right now, Colin. They have 4 games left. He has 28 touchdowns and they're 11-2. The one play you were alluding to when he scrambled around, he kind of did a 360, went across, threw it to Jefferson across his body. I thought that looked like Josh Allen.
Yeah.
And that was a play today. If you are the GM and the head coach, you go, this is exactly why we said, Kirk Cousins, we're not in the market for you anymore. Because you've never had that in the bag. But the version that we're seeing out of Cousins just got $100 million guaranteed. He hasn't thrown a touchdown in 4 weeks, and he's throwing picks just by multiple picks every. I mean, he might be cooked. Like you saw today was a pivot point. One guy's career feels like it's kind of headed toward the drain. Like, is he even going to be starting next week? Yeah. And the other guy is exploding. And you use Rich Gannon as your example. Rich Gannon did not have this level arm. Rich Gannon did not. That was the knock on Rich. Why a lot of people back in the day were like, it was hard for Gruden to sell Al Davis on Rich because he liked those big arm quarterbacks, and that wasn't Rich, but Rich was really accurate. Sam Darnold's 68% this season, Colin. 68%.
Crazy.
Now, listen, he's going to turn the ball over a little bit. He's got 10 picks. Probably end up with 13 or 14. How often do you watch him and you just see him explode the ball down the field? Well, now that their left tackle's injured, the best 2 players on the Vikings are the 2 wideouts. So those guys are thriving under Sam. How could you? I've said before, today is a great example. He threw 5 touchdowns against a team with a lot of good defensive secondary pieces.
Yeah.
In your wildest dreams, you would desire JJ to become this player one day, to be that good, what we witnessed today. And the chances, based on the history of we all watching the NFL and knowing how hard this league is, it's less than 50% he's ever that good. Well, Sam currently is this good and now has this, I would say, resume of life in the league of building on calluses, going through adversity, being very confident in himself, but having humility to know how hard it is. Like, he's seen it all. He has seen the worst of the worst. And then with Kyle and now Kevin O'Connell, I understand that they drafted a quarterback, but sometimes things change. I mean, the 49ers drafted Trey Lance and they pivoted in the blink of an eye to Purdy.
Yep.
And sometimes isn't that part? You started the volume, like pivot fast, right? I mean, Sam Darnold. Yeah, so what? He's going to cost you a lot of money. If he's a top 5 or 6 quarterback in the NFC, I mean, this year, how many NFC quarterbacks are better than him? He's better than Jalen Hurts right now.
Well, we're talking about Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield had a good quarter today, but was awful for long stretches in the game. Awful. Geno Smith.
3 turnovers.
Yeah, Baker was awful. And that, by the way, and I've tried to be very positive with Baker because I was so rough on him early, but he can be really reckless, and you can't coach that out of him. He's just a different personality. He literally lives for chip on his shoulder. Sam doesn't have that. Sam's not trying to prove anything other than I'm good. Sam's like a beach boy. He's having a good time. He's a Oceanside, linebacker basketball. He's an athlete. He's a great kid. Baker's got that chip a mile long. Baker's battled his own family at times. It's part of his great fabric and his story I love. But Geno Smith, there's limitations. Baker is reckless. Darnold, you're getting a higher upside I always thought Baker was a better pure pocket passer. This year, I'm not sure. And some of it's Justin Jefferson, but it's not like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and the guys down there are bad either. I just think letting him walk out the door. What if he goes to an NFC team?
Yeah, to me, though, use Baker as a good example. Aren't we all a little bit of a product of our past? I mean, Baker was a walk-on at Texas Tech at 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Sam Darnold, 6'4" at USC.
Right.
in the most turmoil time in the history of the program leads him to 11+ wins. I mean, in the ugliness of the mid 2010s, he's a strapping big arm, like he's a confident, he's a blue chipper.
He won a Rose Bowl against a good Penn State team with a really bad college football coach and no pros around him. You go back to that year and it was hero ball. That's all it was.
I'm pro Baker, and he's really matured. He's become a good player, but the skill set of the two, Sam is the more dynamic player.
Yes.
And looking back, like if you did a redraft, I think both of them probably aren't going 1 and 3, but clearly they've lived up to like they're going to play in the league for a long time. Sam's high end is higher than Baker because his mobility
bigger.
And I just think it's pretty clear. You watch Sam; he's got an explosive arm, and on the move he can really sling it, and that's. The playmaking Minnesota, what limited that team the last couple of years? Cousins was a stagnant, can't move if you throw him off his spot. Sam's unfazed. Got to ad-lib, no problem. Let's rip.
That was this week's Sunday Night Football, brought to you by Uber Eats. As the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL, Uber Eats has the best game day deals all season long. I use it every weekend. Order now for game day. Now for a segment called Making It Look Easy, brought to you by Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Today, Sam Darnold. Boy, did he make it look easy. 5 passing touchdowns, 347 yards against the Falcons, an amazing second half. Just like Sam made it look easy, Morgan & Morgan does the same. So easy to submit a claim, has over 100 offices nationwide, more than 800 lawyers, with over $15 billion recovered for their clients. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting to get you full and fair compensation. They've been fighting for the people for over 35 years. So if you're ever injured, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound 529 to check out America's largest injury law firm. Winning in the NFL is hard. Hiring Morgan & Morgan is easy. So now I want to go, and we don't have to spend as much time on these two games because I want to talk a lot of college football playoff. Pittsburgh beats Cleveland 27-14. Russell Wilson 6-1 as a starter. Good on for third down. Now, they didn't have Pickens today, who, I don't know what they said, hamstring, but George Pickens wasn't around. And there were real limitations. Like, this is one of these, you know how like A.J. Brown leads Jalen as much as Jalen leads A.J. Brown. Like, A.J. Brown's got this weird stat. He's like the most instrumental wide receiver in the league. Like, the team's different. Boy, George Pickens with Russ is dangerous. Without him today, I mean, they didn't do much. But again, this is the first time in years they don't make a lot of mistakes. They get to the line. They're pretty good on third down. I think Pittsburgh's going to have a hard time in a division with Burrow. You don't want to start over again. You got Burrow, Lamar Jackson. Hell, Jameis Winston's productive. I don't know what Pittsburgh does. They have to sign him, don't they?
I thought Russell had two of his better throws this season on a couple touchdown passes in the red zone today. You know, just
the tight end,
balls, getting the ball out of his hand. He had a Freiermuth on the one,
yeah.
on another one, getting it kind of under a defensive back. I thought today was a really big moment for Russell because, like you said, I mean, George Pickett, it was kind of like Malone and Stockton, and that was his guy. And then you remove him. And early on, you know, the Browns clearly are going to play very well against these teams in the division. They're very confident at home or on the road. They're going to have the worst record in the league that every team has to take very seriously down the stretch if you're trying to make the playoffs.
Listen, they missed field goals today. They could have
field goal kickers in shambles right now.
Okay, they had a chance. This could have been a final drive of the game contest. I mean, there's no question. Cleveland was in this thing. Jameis, you know, so that's my take. Russell didn't play particularly well. They missed their star, but they beat a division rival, and he just doesn't make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, to me, if he's not turning the ball over and can be productive for you in the red zone, their defense, this franchise, how they are able to find these defensive linemen. They had 95 today, had an interception on a screen pass from Jameis. They have like 3 or 4 pass rushers outside of TJ Watt. Cam Hayward's been in the league, it feels like, for 20 years, still making plays. I mean, their franchise, I was wrong. I thought it was time for a divorce and just time, like Andy Reid, Philly, it was time.
That's what I thought.
And listen, and I also thought this. I thought going from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson was going to be an epic mistake. And he
in the locker room,
he has been such a major upgrade. And I've seen some clips like Justin Fields still in it. Maybe sometimes every human being fails at different times. Some are more public than others. Maybe it was healthy for Russell. Maybe it's just kind of changed him a little bit because he has, it feels like, ingratiated himself with a group and a city and a friend. It's not easy to do. I mean, that's not exactly diva. You know, it's blue collar working man team, and he feels kind of one of them. I mean, I take him pretty serious. I was impressed today because I thought Cleveland early on was coming to play. Jameis was making some plays. I'm like, Cleveland's confident against Pittsburgh. They just beat him a couple weeks ago. You're like, this would be a bad loss. And they kind of hit the Jets, and all of a sudden they were up a couple touchdowns and never looked back.
Okay, Seattle 30, Arizona 18. Seattle's now 8-5. They sweep Arizona, really dominate the game, ran the ball effectively. Kyler Murray had a couple ugly picks early in the game. You know, it's really interesting when I watch Geno again. You know, 24 of, I think, 30. It was just, again, kind of stoic, sits in the pocket, makes the throws. I love Seattle's skill talent. I think they have 2 backs I like. Smith and Jigba. Lockett's still banging around this league, which is crazy. He was a gadget guy, and now it's a 10-plus career. I look at Seattle. They're going to make the playoffs now. It looks, I mean, they're 8-5. They have a 62% chance to make the playoffs. I got to tell you, this, as Pete Carroll hangs around the USC Inferno right now, I know deep down, Pete Carroll, we'd take that job in 2 minutes, I think you and I put Geno below Baker and Sam Darnold. Maybe you don't, but I don't think he's. I
do.
Yeah, so do I. This roster, I mean, they are missing a quarterback. Now, I thought they should have gone after Penix last year. Parts of me think I don't know what to do with Seattle, but you know, I'm sitting there watching it today. This is Arizona's biggest game of the year. They just got hammered by Seattle. Shit, Seattle took total control of the game in the first half. Felt like they sealed it early with picks. I think this coach is good. I think the roster's fairly, I think we don't know a lot of their players, but you go watch the way they came back and won against the Jets. You watch the way they went to Arizona. young teams tend to be more emotional, John, and Seattle's young in spots, but these young teams don't know what they don't know. I think Seattle's better than I thought. And before the season, you said, I said, give me a team. Denver was my team. No, Washington was my team I thought was going to be better than everybody thought. And I said, give me a team that we're going to look up in week 15 and go, damn. And yours was Seattle. Mine was Washington with the Commanders. They had all new people. And I said, good. All the other people were awful. They've upgraded at everything, owner down. Would Seattle, if the Rams and Seattle played in the playoff, we would take Stafford and McVay, right?
Depends where the game was. I think you're understating the coach as being good. I think he's awesome. I mean, look at Baltimore since he's left. Their defense last year was historic, and they've fallen apart. Same players.
They're awful now.
And you watch Seattle as they've gotten guys back. They are much better on defense. This was my favorite bet of the weekend, was them 2.5 on the road. One, they've just played well in Arizona for a long time. And two, you could tell this Arizona team had been leaking oil. Now, Kyler parlays his 2 picks down the stretch in the last game, right back in the first quarter, throws 2 awful picks, and then unraveled on him fast. And once it's 24-10, it's like, you can tell with Arizona. When they're vibing and they show up, you're like, okay, it's going to be a game. When they get a little off kilter, listen, he is a freak talent. Like, I don't think we'll ever see another 5'9" guy drafted number 1 overall again. Now, granted, Bryce went too, and Bryce has looked a lot better. But Kyler is truly, his version of like Bo Jackson or Deion Sanders, just physical talent. It's all-time great. But his body language when he plays bad early, he kind of can go in the tank.
Yes.
And your quarterback, we talked about Buffalo early. They're getting their ass kicked, and Josh keeps his head up and keeps swinging. Kyler just kind of gets mopey. And that was the knock on him, and it felt like he had matured a little bit. And it's like he kind of went back in the tank today. And that's, you saw Seattle, that's the thing they got with Geno, is like he can not play well. And it feels like for the most part, his body language is pretty solid, even when he's getting his ass kicked.
He feels terrible. When Geno makes a mistake, nobody feels worse than Geno. He's got a good heart. He's got leadership qualities. You can tell his teammates in the sideline love him. Geno Smith has limitations, but it's not leadership. It's not work ethic. It's not attitude. Geno Smith busts his ass every week. He really appreciates this opportunity.
The one thing with Seattle, Colin, is their schedule. These next 2 weeks, they are Packers-Vikings. Now, they're both in Seattle, but that's going to be tough. You're getting the Packers, who I would say are going to come into this. I mean, this is a big game for them. They've got to lick their wounds after that Lions game, right? Because now they're 9-4. They feel destined for a wild card spot. That's a big moment for them. In Minnesota, I don't know how they do it, but they feel like they're going to end up winning 14 games. Then they play the Bears, and then they play the Rams. Now, if the Rams beat the Niners this week, that game, week 18, could be the Sunday night winner get in for the division, right? 2 9-win teams. Whoever wins gets 10 and wins the division. The other team might be on the outside looking in, not even get a wild card spot. So I think if Seattle wins one of these next 2 games, they're going to win the division. If they lose both of them and the Rams beat the 49ers, I think we got, a division on our hands. I take Seattle pretty seriously. I think their coaching staff, head coach is a stud. Ryan Grubb clearly is really good. The dude they took from DeBoer, who had never coached in the pros. And Geno hasn't really, he's looked exactly like he has the last couple of years. If not, even he's been a little more consistent. What can they do this year? Is like they're a little more hammer the run. I mean, today Charbonnet, who's our backup running back, had 125 plus yards. And like you said, if they get Walker, to me, if they're going to be taken seriously, like in a playoff game and win this division, that his injuries have been a little bit of a problem. If they can keep him healthy, their offensive skill guy minus the quarterback is as good as any. Like, it's like Eagles level, right? With their wide receivers, the tight end, multiple running backs.
Yep. Walker runs so hard. He's the kid that led college football at Michigan State, yards after contact. He runs so hard, he hurts himself. He's got a little bit of that James Conner in Arizona. He runs violently, so he's banged up a lot. All right, last game I want to talk about before we get into the college football. Dolphins in overtime beat the Jets 32-26. Best game Aaron Rodgers played this year, 27-39, 340 yards. Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson combined for 16 catches and over 220 yards. Aaron looked good first half and second. They played much better than I thought. They had a chance to win this game. But the reason I think it's interesting, and Tua had a good afternoon, but the Jets averaged 6.5 yards, and Aaron was on his game, so we should say that. But they still lost. And so the draft order today is Raiders, and I assume they'll take Shedeur Sanders. Giants, the question is, do they go after a Darnold or is it Cam Ward? New England, Panthers, Jaguars, Titans, Jets at 7 actually probably go and either get Kelvin Banks, the Texas tackle, or Will Campbell, the LSU tackle. That's a fairly predictable draft pick. But it's interesting because I was looking at the draft order as I watched the Jets and the Dolphins, and it's getting very defined now. Like the Raiders and the Giants, they're bad teams. Let's talk about the Jets before we get into this. Miami's not going to make the playoffs. I mean, again, Aaron tore them apart today. He was even 2 for 2 on fourth down. They're going to get a new coach. Now, as I said earlier with the Bears, they need a culture coach. I think that's exactly what the Jets need. And now Vrabel said he was interested this week in the Jets as long as he liked the general manager. I'm just going to ask you straight out because I don't think the Dolphins are really that much of a story. I think the Jets, like the Bears, are dysfunctional, but there's some really good players on both teams. Where do the Jets go for a coach? Because they'll have the 7th pick. They'll be able to address one of their, I mean, I think it's a pretty good team. I think they need to get a young, they have one tackle in from Penn State, right? They need another one. Jets, your thought on coach and quarterback going forward?
Well, I've been saying this for a while. I think the next head coach of the Jets is going to be Rex Ryan.
I don't think you're wrong.
He's been politicking for this job.
Yep.
Mike Tannenbaum, I've known for a while, is now running the search. He was Rex Ryan's general manager when they had some success. Phil Savage, who I think you know as well, is their current interim GM, worked with Rex in Baltimore. Rex has been going on every single news outlet. He wants this job. And from all reports, him and Woody did not have a bad relationship when he got fired. It was, remember, they hired Itzik, and it was one of those, he let his GM make a decision. But like the most success the Jets have had in my adult life, I'm 40, was by far with this guy. This franchise had sucked. They had a little moment with Herm Edwards, I remember in the early 2000s, but what was that, like one and done in the playoffs? Like Rex was beating Belichick in the playoffs. I just think he gives them a little, can handle the media, gives them a presence. Like, obviously, I would be interested in Vrabel as well. That would make a lot of sense. But this is where it gets difficult with a guy like Vrabel, because he just had a situation when they fired John Robinson and brought in the new GM. It got weird for him fast. Yeah. And these guys aren't comfortable. It's why, and I know you talked about Kyle Shanahan getting traded to the Bears. Kyle Shanahan would do a swan dive off the Golden Gate Bridge before he answered to Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren. You know why? Because when the 49ers hired Kyle Shanahan, it was very, very difficult for them to find a match. They were interviewing a bunch of number 2s, and he's like, I don't really want to work with this. I don't know this guy. How about my guy, John Lynch? That's how John Lynch became the GM. These guys, they're not addicted to power. They just want to be comfortable with the guy they spend more time with than their wife. It's a weird, that's where it's like, well, Phil Savage is already their interim. He knows Rex really well. You can already see it coming. And it's kind of an easy move for the Jets. A lot of these teams don't fire coaches because I don't think their coach or their owner wants to go on a search. All these guys, they don't really know. Once you hire enough coaches, it doesn't, Ben Johnson, you could have the greatest offense since Bill Walsh. That doesn't translate into them becoming a head coach. When the Eagles hired Andy Reid in 1998 or 9 or whatever, the reason they did it, he wasn't even technically the coordinator with Green Bay. They had done a long study that being a coordinator does not directly tie to just guaranteed success, right? That's why sometimes special teams coaches have got more opportunities over the years, because we're dealing with human beings here. It's why the draft stats and none of it means Josh Allen begged for scholarship offers from Fresno State and San Diego State. They wouldn't call him back. This is all hit and miss, left and right. You never know. And same thing with a head coach. Like, it's a lot when Jamison Williams gets suspended or gets pulled over because they got 3 Glock 9s in the car. It's not his problem. That's Dan and the GM deal with that. You just keep on scheming, buddy. When you're the head coach, that comes to your desk immediately. Hey, we need a decision. What are we doing? And that's where, to me, you get guys. The Jets and the Bears, both those two teams have to hire a guy who's been a head coach before. They have to, because there's those markets, the pressure. The Aaron Rodgers decision is not easy. If he just doesn't retire, like, he's under contract, he has no trade value, right? So it's like, if you tell me Rex or Vrabel, I could see them just handling him for a year, right? Because it'd probably be somewhat easy, and you can't unload the contract. You might not have a draft pick high enough to get a guy you want.
He'd also have power. It'd be the first year of a 4-year deal. Woody Johnson likes him. Saleh was somewhat powerless because Aaron came in. Aaron's the star. Aaron's got the ring, and Saleh had a losing record. So I think Rex Ryan would come in. He'd handle him for a year. I think Vrabel to the Bears and Rex Ryan to the Jets. I said this 3 weeks ago on my show. It makes sense. I would have no problem hiring Rex Ryan. I think for these tire fires, you need a culture changer. I mean, we just saw it in our election. You don't have to be politically correct. You can offend some people, but if you're viewed as somebody who can change, orchestrate change, you don't care about the criticism. You're bigger than life. You got that Captain America shield up front. It doesn't bother you. Rex Ryan's got thick skin. He can be joyful and playful and funny when you're ripping him. I think it works.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's going to be the move. I really do. And I think this is, listen, we can nitpick the Bills and they are judged against the Chiefs and the Ravens, but I feel pretty confident they're going to keep dominating this division for the foreseeable future.
If you're ever injured, check out Morgan & Morgan. It's America's largest injury law firm, and they are there for you. Over 100 offices nationwide. Think about that. More than 1,000 lawyers with over $20 billion, that's a B, $20 billion recovered for over 500,000 clients. Things happen in life unexpectedly. Submitting an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan is really, really easy. Like, winning in the NFL is hard. We know that quarterbacking in the NFL is hard. Submitting a claim is easy. You're ever injured? Check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound law from your cell phone. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting for you to get a full and fair compensation if there's an unexpected accident in your life. And I've had a few. All right, let's talk college football. The 12-team playoff has come out. Listen, let's get the one thing out of the way. I think Bama's better than SMU, but Bama doesn't have an argument. I watched them get completely shelled against a Oklahoma team that was 2-6 in conference with like a minus 79 point differential in conference. Oklahoma was a bad team, and they got overrun by them. So I don't have any problem. Again, the regular season has to mean something. Yes, Bama's beaten more good teams. If Bama got in, I wouldn't lose any sleep if SMU did not. But I felt the same way both ways. I would have taken probably a Bama, but SMU, after a really hard-fought loss, kind of felt like the move. And I also think, listen, Bama's not consistent enough to be a national champion. SMU's not going to be a national champion. SMU may be a better story. It's better for the sport, big picture. I don't think anybody on the heels of Alabama's, 15-year dynasty is losing sleep because they don't get in.
I don't disagree, but if I was part of the SEC, here's what I would say. College football, I mean, based on the numbers, has never been more popular. Like, more people consistently have never watched more. And the SEC ratings have been insane. So we are carrying the popularity of the sport as a conference and have carried the sport really for a long time now. And we only get 3 teams in. That's where you can just see them, even if it is justified as it is in this situation. All these teams, Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. If any of these SEC teams is 10-2, they are easily in over SMU. We all agree. But we want guarantees. And this is where I think college football is going to go. If I'm the Big Ten, who, like the SEC, is carrying college football with the ratings, the ACC is simply not. like I want to know because getting into the playoffs is very financially viable for the conference, right?
Right.
That's the same thing with the NCAA tournament. And now we only get one difference. Like the difference of us in the SEC is and the ACC is one team. That seems crazy. Like
Yeah.
I watch an unhealthy amount of college football. The gap between the two conferences
Huge.
is Grand Canyon wide. So even if you could justify it, records and everything, that's a big picture problem for me if I'm Greg Sankey. Like
Yeah,
we
I
need
get
some
it.
assurances. And this is where like the NFL, what do tiebreakers go? Conference record. It's impossible to do tiebreakers and everything in college football because the SEC goes, my 8-4, what is that worth in the ACC? Am I 10-2 in the ACC? Like by Big 12, Arizona State's an incredible story. What would their record be if I put them playing LSU, Bama, Ole Miss, Arkansas? So it's not apples to apples at all.
That's
And that's
right.
the hard part. I think we all agree on that, even if we go, yeah, SMU deserves it. But it's like, it's a little out of whack. Now, it's first year. I'm not going to complain that much. I don't feel that bad. And I think the committee wanted Alabama because I do think Alabama, the needle moves a little more when you got Alabama playing. Because who's SMU is playing Penn State? Like,
Yeah.
Alabama, Penn State's just a better television product, isn't it?
Yeah. So here's the one that really cracked me up. So the regular season, the committee said the regular season matters. We're not going to give Bama 3 losses, 2 of which are mulligans, Vandy and Oklahoma. But yet, Oregon has the most impressive regular season and arguably the most impressive championship game performance. Georgia's up there as well. They get the winner of the Tennessee-Ohio State game, which is a team capable of winning the national championship. Then they could face Texas and Georgia. How did Penn State get an easier route? They lost at home to Ohio State and got hammered by Oregon. I think now they play another game. I think they have a much easier route than Oregon. I thought Oregon kind of got hosed.
Yeah, to me, them copying the basketball bracket where you're forced to play team instead of the NFL bracket where you reseed by the round.
Yes, yeah.
To me, you got to change football-wise reseed by the round.
Yes.
Because Oregon has the only undefeated team, clearly, if you just watch the best team currently
in the
country,
second best conference.
And they get stuck with Ohio State, Tennessee. That seems pretty outrageous.
I thought
because
so.
if they could pick the opponents, I think there's a decent chance that Ohio State would be the last opponent they would want to play. Yeah. Maybe Notre Dame second. And Tennessee would be high up there too. Like the SMUs, the Clemsons. You got to reseed. Now, this is where I'm not going to freak out year one. You got to figure it out. But you cannot keep this. How can Boise and ASU potentially get easier opponents than Oregon? That's not
Penn
fair. Now,
State,
I think they would say Oregon's going to play the Rose Bowl. Like that's where their game's going to be. I think in the like their home game. So that it's kind of regionality, but playing Ohio State potentially, that's pretty difficult.
And Ohio State will fill half that stadium. I mean, Penn State gets SMU and Boise State. I mean, potentially. It's like, Jesus. The biggest game of the year at home, they lost to Ohio State. And I mean, they got pushed around. I mean, they could not stop Oregon. I just thought Penn State, and I understand punishing. If you flip Penn State and Ohio State in the playoff, I think it's more fair. Now, Ohio State, again, the Michigan loss was not only bad, not only at home, but it made you question the entire program. Like when Penn State lost to Ohio State, you didn't question the program. You're like, well, Ohio State's better. That Michigan, I mean, listen, if you want to ask yourself who's getting punished, it's Ohio State. I think Tennessee is the sleeper national championship pick in this thing.
I thought Herbstreit had a good point during the show when they released the bracket of, Ohio State maybe would rather go on the road because a couple early 3-and-outs, maybe you're down 7-0, 10-0, that place will turn on you fast because that group's edgy. That group's already pissed off. In a weird way at 10-2, hosting a playoff game is a major disappointment.
Yeah.
Watching that game last night, I thought it was so insane that Clemson is now in the playoffs and Miami's just long gone, even though all season Miami was like a top 5 or 6 team. And then Penn State, my takeaway with Penn State, Oregon's tough, and that's their skill group is better top to bottom. I think Penn State has their front 7 full NFL guys, best tight end in the country. They have a 1-2 running back combination. Quarterback, a little all over the map, but he is extremely talented. and you saw a couple passes where you went, whoa,
Yep.
that's a top 10 pick. And then you saw a couple other passes, you're like, that's a 6-rounder. But you
Right.
never really know what you're going to get with them. But they have a lot of talent on their team. Like, to me, if the quarterback has a B+, A- game, they could play with most anyone in this tournament. I'm with you on Tennessee. Their defensive line is really good. And what's
Yes.
Ohio State's problem right now? Well, their offensive, they just had a guy tearing Achilles.
Well,
They missing that could be a rough. I'm telling you, that place could start booing if it's like 10-0 in the second quarter.
The weather forecast for this weekend in Columbus is 40 degrees and wet. It's not playing to a finesse down the field team. So Will Howard, who's been hot and cold in big games, it's 40 degrees. The pressure's on. You'll be favored. And Tennessee D-line and Ohio State O-line, if you're forced to run the ball against Tennessee, that's got a 17-13 feel to it. That's not going to be a high-scoring game, in my opinion.
One thing that's going to be, for the most part in college, you get a couple, and you hammered this home when the West Coast teams got in the Big Ten. There aren't as many cold weather games as you think. In the NFL, there are. Why? They play all through December through January. Yeah. College football usually ends home games the last week in November, and then they go to warm weather bowls.
That's right.
That's where this changed, because they're playing in 2 weeks, right? And it's Friday night, Saturday night at South Bend and at Ohio State, which makes sense. I mean, two of the biggest brands, those going to get huge ratings. Plus the NFL plays Saturday, so it gets a little lost in the shuffle. Like Texas, the Texas game and the Penn State game are going up against like Ravens Steelers. So, but those 2 night games are going to be by themselves. It could be really cold. I mean, it's going to have one thing with playoff football, even with the best teams, it's usually not 35-30 scores, right? It's usually lower scoring. You can't feel your hands. I mean, you could have a game in 2 weeks at Ohio State with it. Couldn't it be 27 degrees, or Notre Dame? It could be freezing cold.
Okay. Let's talk Clemson at Texas. I really like Texas in that spot. But I'm watching that game against Georgia. Georgia gets their quarterback knocked out and suddenly forced to run in the second half. They found their run game. When they went to overtime, and the Texas series, they throw the ball out of the end zone. Then they do a fade pattern, and then they throw it out in the flat against, Georgia's linebackers and corners or NFL guy. I mean, Georgia's got a first-round safety, a first-round corner, first-round defensive end. It's like, you're not going to beat in the flat. You're not going to beat Georgia for the last 8 years. I thought, for an offensive coach, Sark, I hated the overtime Texas play calling. I thought it was awful.
Listen, I've been one of his biggest critics. I will defend him. I don't think he trusts his quarterback at all. And I don't blame him, because I don't think he's very good. And early on in that game, when actually he wasn't playing that bad and Georgia was a little shell-shocked, instead of being up 17-3, it's 6-3.
Yeah.
And then as the game went on, I thought Ewers became much more to who he's kind of become this season, as very, very average.
Yes.
And he's just not an explosive player. He's not a good playmaker.
That's a great line. As a former scout, you're nailing it. When I watch him, he's not an explosive player.
No, he's not a playmaker. Like, you watch one thing, Bryce Young, his comeback story, he's starting to make plays.
Yes.
Right. Most decent quarterbacks can throw a slant route or an out route from the pocket. But half the plays, you're going to have to scramble. You're going to have to move. You're going to have to throw on the run. You might have to break a tackle. And you watch Quinn Ewers, he cannot do any of that. So as the game goes on, what does Georgia do? They start getting pressure on him. He starts getting sacked. He's not a very dynamic guy. Carson Beck, like, one thing when the other guy, Gunnar Stockton, what an incredible name, by the way, comes in, he is so mobile that he can just keep plays alive. They don't have that. Texas does have that with Arch Manning. Now, I don't know if Sark believes he's as good of a passer right now as Quinn Ewers, clearly, by not playing him. You've already paid Quinn the NIL, but I think they have no shot to win the national championship with him at quarterback.
Yep.
You remove him, if every team just has the same quarterback, like if you put all 12 teams equal quarterback, Texas has as good of a chance to win the national championship as anybody. You watch Oregon last night, that little quarterback looked like Tua did at Alabama. I mean, some of the throws he was making, it's like, this guy is playing quarterback in college better than all these guys.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
that's
think
a huge advantage. Obviously, Oregon has really good skill guys, better than
yeah.
Georgia. You watch Bowers. I mean, they miss Bowers and McConkey, but still, Dylan Gabriel right now is playing the best at quarterback for all these teams, even though Georgia, Texas, like they
You know
have a
what?
bunch of talent, but their quarterback plays shitty.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. When I watch Georgia, they have an incredible defensive lineman, Mikhail Williams. They have a great safety. When I watch Georgia, I mean, they're running backs last night. They're bringing in second, third, fourth. They are running that second half. It was violent. They are running over guys. You know, with Texas, I know they have a bunch of good players, and Kelvin Banks, who got hurt, is a really, really good tackle. But it's funny, when I watched Michigan win the Natty last year, they had Will Johnson at corner, Mason Graham, Blake Corum, J.J. McCarthy. They had about 6 players that even in a game against Ohio State, you're like, wow, those are great players. Georgia's national championship teams. It can be Pickens, Brock Bowers, Lad McConkey. It can be one of, Jalen Carter.
Jalen Carter, yeah.
Yeah. In Bama. Ohio State has 4 or 5 guys like that, many at receiver. Caleb Downs for Ohio State, the kid they got from Bama, he'll be the number 1 pick next year. He's an insane generational talent. When I watch Texas, this is weird, John. They got a bunch of good players. But I watch that offense and I'm like, they have good backs. They have good receivers. I don't see a lot of wow. And I know it's a really good roster. But if you look at national championship teams, Michigan last year, Georgia teams, when Clemson was winning, you'd have like a Mike Williams, you'd have a Trevor Lawrence, you'd have a linebacker that you're like, oh, okay, that's different. Even in a game against Bama, that player's different. ATM, the running back for Clemson.
Yeah.
I look at Texas, and I know this sounds crazy because their recruiting's been great, but I just don't see enough wow. I see very good everywhere, but they couldn't score against Texas A&M. They can't move the ball against Georgia in the first half. That's with Sark and an NFL quarterback and the best left tackle in the sport.
Yeah, they should be able to run the ball better. Number 26, I mean, he should average like 100 yards a game. I mean, that's one element. I mean, I think sometimes the depth, this gets back to these top teams are not 10 deep. Like they don't go, back to back. Their backup offensive line are not future pros. And that's where I think when you look at these former teams, Clemson in their heyday in the late teens, beating Alabama, they were going too deep with pros getting drafted in the second round.
Yes.
Saban's team forever. The last of Kirby, like this version of Kirby's teams relative to the back, don't even have anything in common.
Right.
I think Michigan's team last year would easily win the national championship again this year. Like that same
easily. Even Washington last year that lost in the Natty. I mean, you were looking at Roma Dunze, Michael Penix, their receiving core, up and down their receive. They had a right tackle and an interior offensive lineman. You were like, you could just tell this is like 8 really good players.
Team was real, and I think is that a little bit why. At first I thought Belichick was just interviewing with North Carolina to just, it's like the guy who's trying to impress the girl and brings another girl to the party to get people to notice him. You just want to show NFL teams like, hey, I'm talking to people. And then you start reading, like, what if he realizes it actually might be a little easier in college because the parity is there. And it's not like I'm not at a huge disadvantage most of the time. And you watch in college football, like you said, Tennessee is a good value. You could say Notre Dame if the quarterback just said all these teams. Would it shock you? Like in theory, Oregon is the best team, but then you look at the bracket, how hard it's going to be. Like plus, I don't take Boise and ASU seriously. Like I expect both them to get knocked out. But I would say of all the SEC and the Big Ten, like Indiana, they'll be one and done. But I think Georgia could win any game, could lose any game.
Same.
Texas could easily be like I could see them look like shit. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's all on the table, which makes this tournament pretty intriguing. Maybe the transfer portal and the NIL spreading out makes the 12-team bracket even that much more intriguing. Because back in the day, you put a Pete Carroll, USC, a Nick Saban in their heyday, they would kick the shit out of all these teams. Wouldn't even be fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's the benefit of the transfer portal is that nobody has depth. Even the top teams, just you lose a left tackle at Ohio State, then you move a guard to left tackle, then your interior lineman gets hurt, you get weak, you have a unit that is a liability very quickly in college football now.
Do you think, I haven't heard your take on the Belichick, North Carolina. Do you think that's more just trying to prove, or do you think there's some real substance behind that?
I think he wants to get his son the job. His son's at Washington. I think he wants to get his son a head coaching job. And I think Bill is so big on the East Coast. People out West don't care, but people out East do. I don't think he would have to have an incredibly young collegiate staff, which I'm not sure he has the patience for. I just don't know if he has the patience. Bill was always the grinder. It was always sacrifice for the team. Shit, kids aren't sacrificing now. They'll bounce in a second. Now, do I think schematically? I mean, Charlie Weiss was schematically excellent. He just couldn't recruit. He just didn't want to get out there. Bill's not going to, Bill will do some private jet stuff, but Bill's not going to be on the road. He views himself, as he should, as a different level. Andy Reid, again, is a funnier guy, a more social guy. I don't think he'd want to be on the road recruiting.
Did you see Albert Breer's report about how many homes Deion Sanders has been in the last 18 months? 0. Because in this day and age, they used to have rules. Like when I worked at Fresno State, only like 6 or 7 of your guys were eligible to go recruit and go into someone's home. Now there are no rules. Anyone, you could hire a recruiting staff, former players that just go recruit. You don't have to go into homes anymore. And it makes sense. Like when I saw they technically had like a early recruiting signing day a couple days ago, right? And some of these kids were saying like, this guy just recruited me. No, you got paid the most money. The game has completely changed. And maybe Bill, who views it much more from a strategic business mindset of like, hey, if you give me 10 plus million in NIL funds, I feel I have a pretty good idea. I can bring a couple of my guys from the NFL to figure out how to allocate this pie. I'll pick the players. And maybe he views it much more because it has much more of an NFL feel. Now, the difference is like when I sign you to a 3-year deal, you're under contract. In
Right.
college, these guys, as someone texts me around college, he's like, if you've noticed some of these random teams, and I didn't, that a kid just won't play the last couple weeks, on a team that's like going to be 6-6, they'll just be sick.
Yeah.
Well, they're transferring.
Yeah.
And they'll just go to the coach on Wednesday or Thursday of like week 11 when the team's not going anywhere. And like, coach, I just don't feel great. I'm out. And that's happening all over the place. Before,
Yeah.
I mean, that guy would just keep playing. I said this before about like Kyle McCord transferring. In the history of the sport, Kyle McCord just would have been Ohio State's quarterback again. And what if he just would have taken the next step and all of a sudden Ohio State was 12-0 and the number 1 seed? But instead they kick him out. Everyone's so quick to move. Where in the NFL, sometimes you just have to keep a guy because you drafted him high and he improves.
Yeah.
And now in college, coaches and players are just so quick to like point the finger at the other guy and bounce or basically cut him. And it reflects when you watch these teams because, listen, the games are still fun, but you can feel that these teams aren't as good, the high-end teams, as they've been.
Oh, no,
I don't even think, like, is this the best Oregon team of the last 15 years? I
don't think so. No, I mean, the other thing is players in college are leaving now, and it's not that they're not productive. USC just lost a kid, Sam Green. He was playing a ton. He was, I think he was a redshirt freshman or a freshman. He was playing a ton. Somebody offered him more money. Bottom line, somebody played USC and went, could be a Penn State. The kids from that part of the country. So kids aren't even disgruntled they're leaving. You're getting cherry picked. Penn State could go, hey, we're losing we're losing 4 really good guys up front. That Sam Green kid, we lost out to USC. Let's just go buy him. So a guy doesn't even have to be disgruntled. But can you imagine in the NFL if you didn't have contracts and you're like, let's just make a bid on, a great left tackle.
One thing I was talking to a buddy that said that the top end of this draft is not very good. I said, isn't that a back-to-back couple years now where it doesn't feel loaded with guys? Are we concerned? Like, do we have any theories? And I started thinking, I wonder if guys now bouncing left and right, you don't develop as you used to just being in a program for 3 or 4 years, consistent practice, consistent training. Now guys are just mercenaries on the move.
The other thing is more guys are playing baseball. Moms don't want their kids to play football. Now, it doesn't matter in the South or Texas or maybe Pennsylvania. But there is lower high school football turnout. And a lot of these great athletes are looking at these baseball contracts and going, guys get 10-year baseball contracts. So I think it's the moms are like, hey, I don't want my son playing football. And I'm not picking on moms. That's just been discussed, right?
But is the O-line, D-line doing that? Are 6'6", 300-pound guys playing baseball?
Well,
they just don't exist.
I still think there's a lot of good football players. And again,
for sure,
I think high school football turnout has decreased. And by the way, the NFL smartly 10 years ago, I talked about this on my show, targeted moms in their ads. About 10 years ago, the NFL, it was around that CTE stuff. Remember when that was getting the big payouts for CTE, the NFL pivoted and said, hey, we have to make sure that both parents are into football. And by the way, it has worked. It is remarkable. The number of women who love football, it's half the league's fans. It's like 50-50 last time I looked. So this has been a point, a real distinction. The NFL has tried to own the household. Not just dad and dad loves it. Nope, that's not what it is anymore. They want everybody. And I think that's part of it. And the other thing is, to your point, I think players aren't as developed. I think, listen, it's like anything else. If you're bouncing around for money and not management, you're never going to be quite as good. I don't care if it's in AI or tech or football. If you had 4 bosses in 6 years, I mean, one of the look at you at our company. You just keep developing, getting bigger, bigger, bigger. Part of it is the salespeople know John. It takes a year or two for the salespeople to get aligned, and we know you, and then we can build your YouTube page. Everything takes growth. My first couple years at iHeartRadio weren't as good as the last 4. Everything. It's a hierarchy you have to build. It's a staff you have to build. So to your point, when some of these players are bouncing around, a lot of times they get the money and they get a worse coach. They get a worse position coach.
It's Brady's point that he hammers nonstop. Like, going through some challenges in college is a healthy thing. Like, you learn a lot about yourself and improve, because in the NFL, it's really hard. So it's easy to get in the tank. Look at Bryce Young, who I would have bet against falling off a cliff. He was mentally prepared for the challenges. Why? He had spent 3 years next to Nick, and who knows, back at, in this modern day, Tua, Jalen. I know Jalen transferred at the end to Oklahoma, but he was there for a couple of years, essentially as the backup going back and forth. That had to benefit all those guys.
Yep. No question about it. All right. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, 3 and Out podcast on a stacked weekend. Good stuff. Almost an hour and a half. Thanks, buddy.
Talk to you soon, Colin.
I judge the quality of a fragrance by the compliments you get. When I wore Ovation for the first time, second time, and third time, usually I walk past somebody and they're like, hey, what you got on? Who over there smelling good? That's the injection of confidence right there to you.
That's right. We want to be at the forefront of using the brand as a gateway for these young athletes. Custom suit, we do a photo shoot, we do video, and it's all about that partnership to create a personal brand.
And I love you guys associating it with more sophistication. Throwing a suit on a kid, sometimes it takes for you to see yourself with a suit on in the mirror to be like, hey, I have more to offer.
Ovation for Men, we're part of Amazon's Black Business Accelerator. Amazon has invested $150 million for the next 4 years to uplift small businesses like myself to scale. Amazon is really putting their money where their mouth is.
They're committed to excellence on every level. They want to scale these businesses to be amongst the best in whatever industry they're in.
You've always been authentic. You've always been pushing excellence.
Well, I appreciate that.
As our slogan says, every man deserves an ovation.
Yes, sir.
Listen, this relationship with Ovation for Men, Richard Sherman, The Volume, this is just the beginning.
I appreciate you guys letting me be a part of your journey. If you haven't already checked them out, go out there, get your man some. And get the sport too. And it can be Christmas, birthday, holidays, or yesterday. But make sure you get it.